generating RESTful interfaces automatically using API Kit. So now we're going to look at a toolkit called API Kit. This open source toolkit includes a router element for Mule applications. This is oftentimes used in API implementations. It'll take inbound requests and route the API. It'll also do validation against the YAML file that specifies the API. API Kit also includes a proxy element for Mule applications, similar to the router, but instead it's not going to be used in API implementations. Typically, it's used in pure proxy scenarios where we still want to route inbound requests against the YAML specification, things like schemas and paths and such. But if it passes, it'll simply pass it down to the subsequent processing inside of the flow. We'll also include an API Kit mapping exception strategy in this toolkit and an API Kit Anypoint Studio plugin to allow our API development to be seamless. So to create RESTful interfaces automatically, rather than previously as we did manually, the Anypoint Studio API Kit plugin can generate an interface automatically from a YAML API definition that we provide. It'll generate a main routing flow where all requests can come in, and then a flow for each resource and method pair that main flow can route to. You can then add processors to the resource flows. Often you'll do something called flow references, which will call into some form of backend logic. So how do we use API Kit to create RESTful interfaces? Well, if we have an existing project, we can add the YAML file to the project. We can right-click on that YAML file and then generate flows from the YAML. If you happen to be starting a new project, maybe one where you've defined your API specification first, you can specify a YAML file when you create the project. This can be local YAML file or a YAML file you have hosted on any point platform. Now the generated interface will look something similar to this. On the left, you can see a main flow. In this case, the flow is exposed on all API-based resources. That request will then go into the API Kit router. And in the middle of the slide, you can see some of the resource method pairings, a flow dedicated to the get flights request, the get flights by ID request, the post flights request. And on the far right, you can see that API Kit exception strategy that's going to allow us to catch exceptions or failures and then map the appropriate response code back, like a 404 for resource not found or a 405 for method not allowed. Again, this is going to provide us a seamless API designed to implementation experience. When you create the project with API Kit components and a YAML file on any point platform, a connection is made to that YAML file. The remote YAML is pulled periodically and compared to the local version. You then can use the API sync view to pull, push, and compare between Anypoint Studio's YAML file and what you have stored in Anypoint platform in the API designer. So let's get right into it. In Walkthrough 3.5, we'll use Anypoint Studio to create a RESTful API interface specifically from a YAML file. We'll add Anypoint platform credentials to Anypoint Studio. We'll add a YAML file from Anypoint platform to an Anypoint Studio project. We'll use Anypoint Studio and API Kit to generate a RESTful web service interface from that YAML file. And finally, we'll test the web service in the API Kit console view and in Postman. Let's jump into it. Back in Anypoint Studio, let's make sure our project is not running. Once you've ensured your project is not running, let's right-click on APDev American. We'll right-click, go to Anypoint Platform in the menu, and choose Configure. Once you choose Configure, you're going to see an authentication page here. Let's go ahead and add our credentials in. When you hit Add, you should get Anypoint Platform's sign-in page. Let's put in our credentials that we've been using for class. And then hit Sign In. Once you've signed in successfully, you should now see your username inside of the platform, and we can hit OK. Now, in this case, we're actually going to make a new project to go through the lifecycle. So, inside of the Package Explorer, let's go ahead and collapse our existing project, APDev American. We'll then right-click in the Package Explorer, go to New, and create a new Mule project. Let's name this new Mule project APDev American Web Service, WS. And in this case, the primary change is we're going to add API Kit components. We can hit the Browse button here and choose whether we want to go locally or from any point platform. And let's choose the platform. Now the Browse API Manager for APIs dialog is going to pop up. Inside of here, we can see all of the different APIs that we currently have. Here's our American Flights API, and that's what we want to use. So let's hit OK. Now it's got the API definition URL, and let's click Finish. Now let's examine some of the items that have changed. First off, in the top right of our screen, if we select API Sync, we can now see that we're synchronized with a RAML file from the platform. Now we have the ability to download and upload changes and even compare changes based on things that may change on the platform with our API definition or in Studio. Additionally, we can see that a lot of flows have been created as well. In particular, we have an API main flow where requests will enter, followed by an API kit router that will be able to route requests. If we scroll down inside of this XML file, we can also see that there's been multiple flows created for the resource method pairings. We can see that there's a get flights flow, a get flights by ID flow, along with a post flights flow, all within this application. As we had also seen in the slides, there's an error handling strategy so that if exceptions are thrown, they can be caught and an appropriate status code and message can be sent back to the client so they can understand what went wrong. Now, additionally, if we select our HTTP endpoint at the beginning, we can see here that we're now listening in on the path API. So as long as the root resource is API, we're going to be able to make a call to flights and so on. Now, if we do scroll down inside of one of our flows, such as get flights and select set payload, you can see that there's already some data inside of here. This is because we generated these flows from a RAML file, so it's utilizing our example payloads inside. Now let's go ahead and run this project. If we right-click in the canvas and click Run, it should start up. Now that we're using API Kit, we're going to see the console show up inside of Studio, where we can see some of the details about our API. I'm going to double-click on this tab to make it a little bit bigger, and I'm going to go into the GET request for flights. Similar to the API portal, we can get all the different details about this resource and its method. We can see here we have a query parameter for code, SFO, LAX, CLE, along with the example response and so on. We can even go in and choose a code and hit get, and that will actually route the request through our Mule application and provide us a response back inside of here. Now similarly, since this is a running Mule app on our computer, we also should be able to make the same request through Postman. So let's switch over to Postman. Once inside of Postman, let's go ahead and do a GET request for the flights resource. If we hit send, we'll now see that it's telling us resource not found. Well, as we saw in Studio, we're now exposed on the API resource. So we need to make a slight modification here. We need to put in API/flights. Now if we hit send, we can see the example response data from all those set payload elements coming through. Now we can see how easy it was using a RAML definition to generate the scaffolding for an API. We can even use some of the implementation details we did previously in the database and hook those into the new interface that was created for us inside of Studio. And that's what we'll look at in the next section.